Okay, so you want to get right to the heart of something complex, right? Cut through the clutter, really understand it without wading through research for weeks.
Yeah, that's the goal here.
Well, today we're doing just that. We're diving deep into the almighty Vice Lord Nation, or AVLN.
We've got this really comprehensive document packed with details.
Exactly. And our mission, basically, is to pull out the most crucial stuff, the most surprising insights about this major Chicago-born organization.
We're talking founding details, how they grew, their activities, symbols, key figures, the whole picture.
We'll trace it all. So let's get into uncovering the key aspects and really the evolution of the AVLN.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating right off the bat is where it all started. Not on the streets initially, but inside.
Inside, you mean incarceration?
Yeah, the Illinois State Training School for Boys in St. Charles,
Wow.
back in 1957.
Wow. So these were young African-American guys from Chicago's North Lawndale neighborhood meeting inside this institution.
Precisely. And our source highlights one founding member, Edwin Pepelo Perry, as the initial leader, the first guy really driving it.
Pepelo Perry. Okay. It makes you wonder about those early days, what they were thinking, planning.
And the name itself, Vice. Apparently one of the founders literally looked it up in a dictionary.
Really? What did they find?
Found a definition. Having a tight hold.
Yeah.
And that just clicked for them.
A tight hold. Huh. That definitely suggests something about their mindset from the very beginning, doesn't it? Control, maybe?
Seems like it. A firm grip. Maybe initially just on their own situation, but, well, that ambition quickly turned outwards.
So when they got out, back to North Lawndale.
Recruitment took off. Fast. The document shows they pretty quickly got into conflicts with other neighborhood clubs, as they were called then.
And it didn't take long for the authorities to notice.
Not at all. By 1964, just a few years later, law enforcement apparently had them marked as a primary target.
Why specifically?
Well, the list of illegal activities was growing. Things like robbery, theft, assault, battery, intimidation, extortion.
Right, so they were establishing themselves through force, basically, building that reputation.
Definitely. That early reputation for violence stuck. But what's interesting is what happened next, an attempt to sort of change that image.
How so?
A leader from one of the original 8 Vice Lord sets, and these sets are like local chapters,
Yeah.
he pushed for this big rebranding. That's when they adopted the name Conservative Vice Lords, CVL.
Conservative Vice Lords, CVL, and the source says this became the foundation for the whole Vice Lord Nation.
That's what it indicates, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a name change either. They developed new logos, started really pushing themselves as a community outreach group.
A community outreach group, that's quite a pivot from, robbery and extortion.
It really was. They even managed to formally incorporate Conservative Vice Lord Incorporated. Got positive press, too. Politicians, community leaders, some people were actually buying into it, or at least seeing potential.
Wow. And they set up things like recreational areas for kids.
They did, which, the document notes, also conveniently doubled as meeting houses for them.
Clever. And then there was the grant.
Oh, yeah, the Rockefeller Foundation grant. That's maybe the most surprising part.
Yeah.
They actually got approved for significant funding.
From the Rockefeller Foundation, how does an organization with that kind of background secure funding like that?
It really highlights the complexities, doesn't it? Maybe effective PR, maybe tapping into genuine community needs, or maybe a bit of both. It's hard to say for sure.
There's even a documentary about this period. Right?
Yeah, Lord Thing. A Chicago filmmaker, DeWitt Beale, made it in 1970. It featured key guys like Bobby Gore and Pepelo Perry. Gives you a real sense of that era.
So they're getting good press, getting grants.
Yeah.
But what was happening underneath?
Well, at the same time, they were consolidating power. Pulling in smaller neighborhood gangs, the Cherokees, Morphines, Comanches, names like that.
So their numbers were swelling.
Significantly. And despite the positive image they were trying to project, the violent crime didn't stop.
Ah. So it was more facade than reality.
It seems that way.
Mm-hmm.
And worse, this is the period when narcotics really started flowing into the Lawndale neighborhood, according to the source.
Okay. And the intimidation, the extortion.
That ramped up, too. Even murders of business owners who wouldn't pay protection money.
Yeah.
So the core activities were still very much there.
So the positive image couldn't hold forever. What about that Rockefeller money?
Predictably, public pressure built up. People started asking questions. It led to a federal investigation into how CVL, Inc., was actually using the grant.
And the result?
Arrests. Several leaders ended up in prison because of that investigation.
And what happened to the early leadership? Perry, Bobby Gore.
By the early 80s, things changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Perry died. Another leader named Alfred also passed away. And Bobby Gore, the one prominent in the documentary,
Yeah.
he was imprisoned for murder.
Wow. So a real power vacuum at the top.
Exactly. And a younger generation stepped in, and they tried. Well, the source calls it another camouflage campaign.
Another one. What was it this time?
This time, around the mid-'80s, it was adopting Islamic ideologies.
Islamic ideologies. Interesting. Was this strategic, or was there some genuine belief shift happening?
That's the big question, isn't it? Hard to know the true motivations. But it led to this huge document in the mid-'90s called Lords of Islam, laid out new rules, new principles.
Lords of Islam. And they even had a headquarters, they call it.
The Holy City.
Yeah.
Near Pulaski and 16th Street.
It feels like they were constantly trying on new identities, but did the core activities change?
Well, the 90s saw them get more sophisticated, maybe, branching out into things like mortgage fraud, credit card fraud, money laundering.
Alongside the more traditional stuff, I assume.
Oh, yeah. Drugs, extortion, violence, that did go away. And the scale, I mean, it's just huge now.
What are the estimates?
The U.S. Department of Justice figures put membership somewhere between 30,000 and 35,000 people.
20 to 35,000, that's enormous.
And they're not just in Chicago. Operating in 75 cities, 28 states, mainly around the Great Lakes, but still a massive reach.
How do you maintain an identity across that many people and places? Symbols must be key.
Definitely. They have some very distinct ones. There's a rabbit wearing a bow tie.
A rabbit, like the Playboy bunny.
Yeah, surprisingly, it's derived from the Playboy logo, and also a 5-pointed star, usually red and gold.
And these are used how? Tattoos.
Very common as tattoos, yeah. Often on the hand, below the thumb. The source suggests it's partly for identification, but also maybe some kind of protection marker if they end up in jail.
Grim. Are there variations?
Yeah, sometimes the rabbit gets stylized, top hat, cane, champagne glass, glove. Adds a bit of flair, I suppose.
And the colors are consistently red and gold.
Red and gold are the official colors, yeah. You see them a lot.
Now, the document mentions a really central figure, Willie Lloyd.
Ah, Willie Lloyd, yes. Very influential. He joined a faction called the Unknown Vice Lords back in the 60s.
And rose through the ranks.
Rapidly. Yeah. To the point where he declared himself the King of Kings of the entire Vice Lord nation.
King of Kings, that's quite a title. Shows the internal power dynamics, I guess.
Absolutely. But his time at the very top, his reign, you could say, was cut short. He got sent to prison for murdering a police officer in Iowa.
A long sentence.
It seems so. And while he was inside, he actually wrote this manifesto, the Amalgamated Order of Lordism.
A manifesto. What was in it?
61 pages, apparently detailing the whole structure of the gang in prison and on the streets, how things should run.
So he was still trying to exert control from prison. He was in and out a few times.
Yeah, incarcerated 1971 to 86, then again 87 to 92. But his release in 92, that's something else.
How so?
The source describes it vividly. Full gang members picked him up, wearing fur coats, in a convoy of 5 limousines.
5 limos, seriously. Talk about making a statement.
Right. Pure ostentation, but that kind of flashy return.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't sit well with everyone. It apparently sparked a really brutal internal war for control.
A gang war within the Vice Lords.
Yeah, in 92. Really nasty stuff. Kidnappings, even murders of rivals' kids. Just horrible violence. Shows how unstable that leadership can be.
And the law caught up with him again.
Yep, back in prison from 94 to 2001 for weapons violations. But then his story takes another huge twist.
What happened after his final release?
He publicly renounced the Vice Lords, completely turned his back on them, and became this really outspoken critic of gang life.
Wow. From King of Kings to public critic, that's a massive change.
He really is. He even tried working as a gang mediator, got involved with a nonprofit.
And didn't he do something at DePaul University?
Yeah, this is wild. He was briefly a guest lecturer for a class on street gangs in Chicago. Even took students on field trips to the West Side.
I can only imagine the controversy that stirred up.
Oh, for sure. But
Yeah.
trying to leave that life, it's incredibly dangerous.
He faced retaliation.
Multiple assassination attempts. Then in August 2003, he was shot. Survived, but was paralyzed.
Paralyzed. And even then, there were rumors.
Rumors that despite publicly quitting, he was still trying to collect taxes from the Vice Lords. He himself believed his attackers were former associates.
It's just inescapable almost. When did he pass away?
He died in 2015 at 64. His whole life story is just a stark example of how hard it is to actually get out once you're that deep in.
Absolutely. The document also touches on the bigger picture alliances and rivalries. Who are the vice lords aligned with?
Key allies mentioned are groups like the Black Pea Stones, the Bloods, Latin Kings, Mickey Cobras, and the broader People Nation Alliance.
People Nation.
Right.
And the rivals.
Primarily the Folk Nation Alliance members, so Gangster Disciples, Simon City Royals, also the Crips. These rivalries drive a lot of the conflict, obviously.
So just to recap the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Founded North Lawndale, Chicago.
Yep. Still a huge presence there and the Great Lakes, but now in 28 states.
Predominantly African-American membership.
Correct. And crucial to remember, they were one of the founding members of that People Nation Alliance.
Okay, so that founding role in the People Nation, what does that really mean, practically? Influence, status.
Yeah, both. It signifies a certain level of seniority and influence within that whole multi-gang structure.
Yeah.
It allows for cooperation against shared enemies, mainly the Folk Nation groups, give them a broader network.
Right, so when you pull it all together, it started as this small group in a juvenile facility
And grew into this massive nationwide organization.
with this incredibly complex history. Crime, obviously, but also these weird attempts at community outreach, adopting different ideologies.
And intense internal power struggles like with Willie Lloyd, just constant flux.
What stands out to me is that cycle, the rebranding attempts,
Yeah.
the conservative vice lords, the lords of Islam.
It is thought-provoking, isn't it? Trying to reshape the image, consolidate power. Were these just tactics or something deeper? And did they fundamentally change anything long-term?
Yeah, it leaves you wondering about the bigger picture. What are the societal factors that allow organizations like this to not just start, but persist and grow so large in urban areas?
Exactly. And what does this specific story, with all its contradictions, the crime, the community front, the internal wars, the rebranding, what does it really tell us about gang life itself and how incredibly challenging it is to actually address?
Definitely gives you a lot to mull over.